The first time I found Karen inside my barn, she was holding a flashlight, a clipboard, and the sheer audacity of someone who thought trespassing counted as civic duty. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Saturday. I remember the exact time because that's when my security camera pinged me with a blurry shot of someone in a leopard print raincoat creeping through my paddock gate like she was auditioning for a budget wildlife documentary. I figured it was a prank until I saw her yank the barn door open and march inside like she paid taxes on the land. She didn't. I did. She lived across the road in a house that screamed HOA President's wet dream. Perfect hedges, motion lights, and the kind of porch swing that had never once been used without a glass of rose. Her name was Karen, and she was exactly the type you're picturing. 40-something, perpetually offended, always wielding a rulebook nobody else agreed to follow. I never joined the HOA. My 5-acre property was grandfathered in before the association swallowed the neighborhood whole. But that didn't stop Karen from acting like I was her personal landscaping project. I pulled into my driveway just as she was emerging from the barn with a look that could curdle milk. She didn't flinch when she saw me. In fact, she waved. Like this was normal. Like people just pop in to examine livestock buildings unannounced. I stepped out of my truck and asked the obvious question. Karen, why are you in my barn? She didn't even blink. Just doing a routine inspection, she said, clipboard in hand like it was a badge. We've had reports of code violations, animal waste runoff, fire hazards, unapproved structures. I looked around, confused. From whom? I asked. I own this land. There is no we. She clicked her pen like it was a gavel. Several residents have expressed concern. I'm the acting chair of the Neighborhood Preservation Council. I stared at her. That's not a thing. She smiled. It is now. To understand how we got here, you have to understand that my barn used to be my grandfather's. He built it with his own hands back when the land was nothing but open pasture and red clay. I restored it after I inherited the property. Kept the exterior traditional, but reinforced the beams, laid in proper drainage, and installed discrete solar panels for power. It's home to 2 goats, 3 chickens, and my workshop, where I do custom woodworking in my spare time. Karen, unfortunately, viewed anything rural as unsightly. In her eyes, my barn was a blemish on her suburban utopia. The animals? Smelly. The solar panels? Reflective eyesores. The weathered fence? A blight. For months she'd complained through passive-aggressive notes left in my mailbox. When those didn't work, she escalated to anonymous reports to zoning. Still didn't work. I'd followed every rule. She hated that. I wasn't surprised that she finally cracked and let herself in. I was just surprised she was dumb enough to do it on camera. I pointed to the barn. You realize you just committed trespassing, right? She scoffed. Oh please. I'm not trespassing, I'm documenting. She made air quotes with the clipboard, which was almost impressive given how thick the entitlement dripped off her words. I motioned to the security camera mounted above the barn door. You're being documented too. And I've got every frame of you crawling through my pasture like a raccoon with a grudge. That seemed to land. Her jaw tightened. You don't scare me, she said, suddenly dropping the friendly act. If you don't bring this property up to neighborhood standard, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal action. I leaned against my truck and gave her my best fake smile. By we, you mean you and your potted geraniums? Karen stormed off, muttering something about rustic noncompliance. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. Because, unlike her, I actually knew how to play the long game. She thought I'd be flustered, that I'd panic and whitewash the barn or sell my goats to appease the HOA gods. But that's the thing. I don't scare easy. And I don't forget a trespass. Especially not one that happens before coffee. The next day, I got a certified letter in the mail from an unofficial sounding group called the Valley View Integrity Task Force. It had no legal standing but was full of colorful language like egregious neglect of suburban aesthetics and unauthorized livestock behavior. It even came with an itemized list of corrective actions, including repainting my barn in accordance with neutral tones and relocating all non-domesticated creatures to a certified agricultural facility. It was laughably fake, complete with a wax seal made from a hot glue gun and red crayon. But it was also bait, and I never waste a good trap. I filed a police report for trespassing. Quietly. I also printed a few of the clearer security stills and hand-delivered them to the station, just in case Karen tried to spin the story. Then I started planning. Not an outburst. Not revenge. Just a little karmic realignment. See, Karen owned a barn too, or rather, a decorative garden house she called a barn. It sat near the back of her yard, all whitewashed and window-boxed, with fairy lights strung up like a Pinterest hallucination. It was empty 90% of the year, except when she hosted wine tastings or HOA meetings where residents were expected to sit on bales of straw placed, just so. I knew because I'd seen it. I'd also seen her unlock it with a key she kept in a turtle-shaped rock beside the hydrangeas. Because subtlety wasn't her strength. It just so happened that my buddy Marcus was a beekeeper. Had been for years. Kept a dozen hives in the next county and harvested honey on the weekend. I called him up. "How portable are your hives?" I asked. He laughed. "Depends who we're stinging." I explained the situation. He didn't even hesitate. "You want bees in the barn, you got bees in the barn." I waited a week. I wanted her to stew. She kept sending letters. Kept pacing her porch like a petty security guard on a power trip. At one point, she walked over and measured my grass with a ruler. I waved at her from the hammock with a lemonade in hand. It drove her insane. The more calm I stayed, the more she spiraled. That was key. Let the pressure build. Let her think she was winning. On a breezy Thursday morning, when I knew she was at her weekly yoga and mimosas meetup, I made my move. Marcus arrived with 2 hives in his truck bed and a smoker box under his arm. We dressed in full gear, crossed the road, and opened the barn with the Turtle Rock key. Inside was all faux country decor and lemon-scented candles. We placed the hives near the back wall, opened the lids gently, and set a slow smoker cycle to keep the bees calm during the transfer. We didn't damage anything. We didn't vandalize. We just repurposed the space. Environmentally. By the time Karen returned, the bees were fully settled. I know this because I was back in my hammock, lemonade refilled, camera pointed discreetly at her front gate. She opened the barn, to grab a folding table, screamed loud enough to startle the goats, and came sprinting out like a Disney villain mid-meltdown. She tripped over a gnome, dropped her phone, swatted at the air. No one was stung, mind you. The bees were as calm as I was. But Karen? She lost it. Absolutely unraveled in her own garden, flailing and screeching like she'd been personally cursed by Mother Nature. That was the beginning. Not the end. But let's just say things only got more unbelievable from there. The morning after Karen's encounter with her unexpected new tenants, her house was eerily quiet. No shrieking. No clipboard. No click of orthopedic heels pacing the sidewalk. It was the kind of silence that screamed louder than any HOA letter ever could. I sat on my porch sipping coffee, a front-row seat to the aftermath of my little bee-born retaliation. Across the road, Karen's husband, who I had only seen twice before, always looking mildly terrified, was dragging a lawn chair and a garbage bag full of wilted hydrangeas out of the yard. He looked over, caught me watching, and quickly pretended he wasn't alive. Smart man. The rumors started almost immediately. Mrs. Dennison, who lived 2 doors down and owned a pair of binoculars for what she called neighborhood safety, informed me via passive-aggressive group text that a swarm had invaded Karen's barn and traumatized her schnauzer. Someone else chimed in asking if it was safe to go jogging or if we needed net. Karen, of course, didn't confirm or deny anything. She just started behaving like she was in witness protection. Her yard decorations came down. The fairy lights disappeared. Even the turtle-shaped rock went missing. But I knew better than to think it was over. Sure enough, by the following Saturday, a white SUV with tinted windows pulled into her driveway. It was adorned with magnetic decals reading Suburban Compliance Group, which sounded like something cooked up during a HOA wine night gone rogue. Out stepped a man in khakis and a polo shirt with a clipboard and a Bluetooth headset, followed by a woman who looked like she'd sued a daycare for excessive glitter. I couldn't hear everything, but the body language said it all. Karen was gesturing wildly toward my property while the clipboard guy nodded with practiced concern. They were inspecting me now. Wonderful. 2 hours later, I had a new envelope taped to my front door. No stamp. No signature. Just a typed-up manifesto accusing me of harboring hazardous fauna, conduct unbecoming a community resident, and non-conforming architectural lines. That last one I had to Google. Apparently, they didn't like that my barn had a cupola. Well, tough. I scanned the letter twice, smirked, then folded it into an origami chicken and set it on the fence post. My goats sniffed it and promptly ate it. Fitting. I was halfway back to my house when I noticed the clipboard guy standing at the edge of my driveway with a phone held out like a taser. "Sir," he began, "this is your formal opportunity to come into compliance." I waved. "Not interested in opportunities right now. But thanks." He narrowed his eyes. "You're refusing to cooperate with the Valley View Integrity Initiative?" I blinked. "The what?" "VVII," he said, as if he was introducing a secret agency. "A subdivision of the Homeowner Wellness Coalition. You people keep multiplying like MLMs," I muttered. Karen emerged behind him like a stage villain, arms crossed and smirking like she'd just dropped a nuke. "Your choice," she said sweetly. "But don't expect things to stay peaceful if you keep making a mockery of this neighborhood." I nodded. "Peaceful? You broke into my barn." She rolled her eyes. "Let it go already. It was a misunderstanding. And now you've made it worse by committing biological warfare on my property." I looked at her. "You know bees are pollinators, right? You're literally benefiting from this." She turned to Clipboard Man. "See? Deranged." Clipboard Man handed me a final warning written in Comic Sans. Now, I could have gone back to the police. I had every legal right. But I wasn't interested in lawsuits. Karen wasn't the kind of person you beat in court. She was the kind you beat by unraveling her delusions one string at a time. So instead, I called in some reinforcements. Specifically, my cousin Emily, an environmental law student with the gift of dramatic presentation and zero tolerance for suburban nonsense. She arrived in a beat-up Jeep wearing a Save the Bees shirt and aviators like a lawyer cosplaying an action hero. We started by hosting a pollinator awareness barbecue. Free lemonade. Locally sourced honey. Educational pamphlets. I put up signs saying barn. Certified bee safe zone. Karen nearly choked on her rage when she saw the line of people at the gate, including several HOA members who showed up just for the pulled pork. Emily gave a speech about ecological balance and urban sustainability. Karen shouted propaganda from her porch and threatened to call animal control. Someone handed her a "Be Kind" sticker. She slapped it onto her garbage can with a death glare. 3 days later, Karen's version of escalation involved hiring a pest control truck. Not for the bees, she was still too scared to open the barn again, but to try and make it look like she was taking action. The truck parked outside for exactly 22 minutes, then left without spraying a drop. I knew the guy. He told me he didn't want to risk a lawsuit over federally protected pollinators. Karen nearly had a coronary when I thanked him with a honey gift basket. Then came her big move. She hosted an emergency HOA meeting in her backyard and invited every resident with a grievance. Unfortunately for her, most of them didn't show up. The ones who did were more interested in the snacks than the tirade. She had printed posters of my barn with captions like "unsanitary" and "rogue apiary." Emily and I stood behind the fence, watching it unfold like a reality show. At one point, Karen tried to play a video of bees flying near her rose bush, but it just showed her screaming and tripping over a rake. I almost felt bad. Almost. But Karen wasn't finished. The next day, I received a visit from animal control. Real officers this time. They were polite, professional, and clearly annoyed. They asked to inspect the animals and the barn. I obliged. They checked the goats, the chickens, and yes, even the bees. None of which, by the way, were technically mine. Marcus still owned the hives. I was just hosting them as part of a collaborative local agriculture program, complete with paperwork. Emily handed them laminated documents like she was on trial. By the end, the officers were chuckling. "You're good," one of them said. "Honestly, this is one of the cleanest barns we've seen." Karen was across the street, binoculars in hand, watching like she was expecting a takedown. When the officers left without a citation, she marched over, veins popping. "You bribed them, didn't you?" she snapped. I tilted my head. "With what?" "Bee hugs," she sputtered. "This isn't over." "Good," I said. I was just starting to enjoy myself. The very next day, I got another envelope. Hand-delivered again. Inside was a summons for a mediation meeting at the community center. Not court. Not a lawsuit. Just a voluntary, passive-aggressive attempt at arbitration. The letter was signed by Karen and 3 other HOA board members who hadn't been to my property once. I RSVP'd with a smiley face and the phrase, "absolutely buzzing." The night of the meeting, I arrived wearing a suit and carrying a large, sealed jar of honey with the label, Exhibit A. Karen showed up late, flustered, and carrying a stack of photos with bees crudely circled in red ink. The mediator, a retired schoolteacher who looked like she missed teaching toddlers, opened with, "Let's all speak respectfully." Karen launched into a speech about threats to community standards, invasive species, allergic reactions, and something about agricultural creep. I waited my turn. Then I stood up, placed the honey jar on the table, and calmly explained the ecological value of pollinators, the legal ownership of the bees, and the footage of her trespassing, which I now had neatly edited with time stamps and background music. Half the room was stifling laughter by the end. The mediator glanced at the photos, sighed, and said, "Ma'am, this seems more like a personal vendetta than a community concern." Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. "So nothing's going to be done?" she barked. The mediator shrugged. "Maybe you should keep your own barn locked." It was over. Officially. Karen had lost every ounce of credibility, and the HOA quietly removed her from the beautification subcommittee the next week. Her house stayed dark for a while. The barn, I assume, remained bee-occupied. I never checked. But I did add one final touch. A small sign above my own barn door. It read, "Buzz off, Karen." Karen's silence was more unnerving than her tantrums. For a woman who once called animal control because a neighbor's cat looked too feral, going radio silent was a red flag the size of a mattress on a freeway. The week following the mediation meeting was oddly peaceful. No HOA letters. No anonymous complaints. No drive-bys with binoculars. It felt like the eye of the storm, and I didn't trust it for a second. Emily had gone back to law school, but not before sending me a color-coded binder titled, "Just in Case Karen Flips Again." It included a quick reference chart on nuisance laws, state beekeeping exemptions, and a laminated card that read, "I do not consent to any inspections." I kept it taped inside the barn door. Meanwhile, Marcus and I moved 2 hives to the rear pasture where the wildflowers bloomed, giving the bees more space and the goats less reason to panic every time one buzzed past. Everything seemed stable. And then Karen struck again. It started with a "for sale" sign. Not in her yard. No, that would have made sense. This one popped up on the edge of my pasture, right beside the old cedar tree that had stood on my family's land since the Roosevelt administration. I spotted it while mowing the front field. A gleaming, freshly planted metal sign that read Prime Land Opportunity, Zoned for Development, Contact Karen Whitmore, Community Property Consultant. I cut the mower, stared, blinked twice. The cedar tree didn't move, which meant I wasn't hallucinating. I took a picture, sent it to Emily with the caption, "What fresh hell is this?" She called within 30 seconds. "Tell me she didn't just try to list your property for sale." "Looks that way. Do not touch the sign. That's evidence now. So I'm supposed to leave it there?" "Yes," she said. "And photograph everything. This is next level crazy. She's impersonating a property rep. That's fraud, maybe even attempted theft depending on how far she takes it." Karen, apparently, had decided that if she couldn't shame me into compliance, she'd simply pretend my land was on the market and hope someone dumb enough would bite. Later that afternoon, I caught her giving a tour. I swear on my goats. She was standing at the sign with a couple in khakis and matching sun hats, pointing toward my barn and speaking with all the authority of a real estate agent on a sugar high. I parked at the end of my driveway and walked out, casual as ever. "Afternoon," I called. Karen froze mid-sentence. The couple turned to look at me. "Can I help you folks?" I asked, smiling. The man glanced at Karen. We're here for the property tour?" She said this parcel was open for subdivision development. I nodded. "You've been lied to. This land isn't for sale. Never has been. I own it. Deeds in my name. Karen here is trespassing. Again." Karen's face went white-hot. "This isn't trespassing. It's a misunderstanding. These people are friends of mine." "Funny," I said. "They sure seemed ready to cut a check." The couple backed away slowly, murmured apologies, and drove off in a hurry. Karen stayed, huffing like a busted teapot. "You're being ridiculous," she snapped. "That sign is a vision for the neighborhood. A concept piece." I folded my arms. "So you planted a fraudulent real estate sign to spark community engagement? It's called aspirational marketing." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Karen, if delusion were a business model, you'd be Fortune 500 by now." That night, I filed another police report. This time, for false advertising and attempted fraud. Emily helped me draft a cease and desist letter that we had hand-delivered via sheriff's deputy. I made sure he arrived at dinner time. Karen opened the door in full makeup and pearls like she was hosting a gala, only to be handed a manila envelope and a grim little smirk from Officer Alvarez, who had become something of a regular in our lives. Karen didn't speak to me for 5 days after that. But I wasn't foolish enough to think she'd gone quietly into her doily-lined abyss. She just changed tactics. If she couldn't get rid of me directly, she'd try to make the property unlivable. First, it was noise complaints. Every time I used my miter saw or ran the tractor or so much as sneezed near the fence, I got an anonymous note citing, "disturbing the peace." Then came fake animal welfare calls. A local volunteer group came to check on my livestock, after someone reported my goats were being starved. They found the animals well-fed, hydrated, and spoiled rotten with handmade salt lick. One of the volunteers asked if she could bring her kids back for a farm tour. I said yes. After that, it was the trash. Karen started tossing clippings, broken twigs, even a full bag of used kitty litter into the drainage ditch that lined our shared road. I caught her once, hunched over like a garden goblin, hurling wilted begonias into the weeds. When she saw me, she screamed, "Community composting is legal," and scurried back to her porch. I didn't retaliate. I documented everything. Photos, video, witness statements. Emily was building a file thick enough to serve as a doorstop. And then fate handed me a golden opportunity. It rained. Not a little drizzle. A full-blown summer storm, the kind that turns ditches into creeks and unearths every piece of trash your neighbor has ever lobbed into a gutter. The drainage system clogged. The water backed up. And by morning, Karen's pristine yard looked like a duck pond, complete with floating mulch, soggy lawn ornaments, and a drowned gnome staring blankly at the sky. I stood across the road, coffee in hand, and watched her try to rescue her begonias with a soup ladle. It was beautiful. She called the city. They called me. I showed them the footage of Karen dumping debris into the ditch. They laughed. Filed a citation. Gave her a hefty fine and a warning that if it happened again, they'd escalate it to environmental misconduct. I printed out the fine notice and stuck it to my mailbox, just to make sure she saw it. I also sent her a condolence card signed, "With love from the barn." But the real masterpiece came a week later. Marcus had been working on a beekeeping workshop for the local 4-H group and asked if I'd be willing to host the first event. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We planned an open barn day, complete with demonstrations, honey samples, and a Meet the Bees activity. The flyer said, "Support pollinators. Support the planet. All ages welcome." The morning of the event, I set up a folding table with pamphlets and a donation jar for bee conservation. The barn was spotless. The goats were brushed. I even tied little ribbons around their horns. By noon, the driveway was full. Parents, kids, local reporters. Even the mayor's assistant showed up. It was wholesome chaos, and it drove Karen insane. She stood on her porch in a sun hat the size of a beach umbrella, muttering into her phone and watching the festivities like a bitter queen at a rival coronation. I waved. She flipped me off with the same hand holding a copy of the HOA bylaws. Halfway through the workshop, someone handed me a printed flyer Karen had slipped into their mailbox earlier that morning. It read, "Warning, dangerous insects nearby, avoid barn area, potential biohazard." The paper had stock photos of bees with glowing red eyes and quotes from anonymous doctors. It was so hilariously fake that one kid thought it was a joke and started handing them out like baseball cards. The thing about people like Karen is, they can never walk away quietly. They don't retreat, they reload. And sure enough, just when I thought she'd finally accepted her defeat, she launched what I can only describe as the HOA equivalent of a scorched earth campaign. It started with an email blast. At 2:13 a.m. on a Tuesday, every resident in the area got a message from an address called neighborhood_integrity_hero@valleyviewmail.net with the subject line, "Barnyard threat escalates, urgent community alert." It featured a grainy, zoomed-in shot of my barn, edited with red arrows and ominous captions like "Suspect structure" and "Illegal livestock storage facility." Underneath was a wall of all-caps text about toxic bees, crossbreeding livestock with wild animals, and possible rabies incidents. I woke up to 23 texts, 5 voicemails, and one extremely confused voicemail from Mrs. Dennison asking if I'd been doing goat experiments. Karen had reached a new level. She wasn't just angry anymore. She was unraveling and taking the neighborhood with her. But the beauty of people like Karen is that they always go too far. Always. It's not enough for them to win. They have to annihilate anything that threatens their imaginary throne. And in the process, they expose themselves more than I ever could. Emily, upon reading the email, burst out laughing so hard she had to mute herself on Zoom. I mean, it's like she Googled "terrorist barn" and just went to town, she said. "You realize this is defamation, right?" "Defamation and impersonating an HOA officer," I said. "Valley View doesn't even have email infrastructure. She made that up from scratch." "Then you know what we need to do next." I grinned. "Public shaming?" "No," she said. "Worse, public proof." That weekend, I hosted the first ever barn open house and eco-education day, in collaboration with Marcus, the 4-H group, and a handful of folks from the local university's AG Science department. We put up signs, handed out flyers, and got it listed on 3 local event calendars. The plan was simple. Let the entire neighborhood see with their own eyes just how not insane my barn was. We invited everyone: HOA members, kids, grandparents, city officials, local press. We had name tags, a ribbon-cutting ceremony, free lemonade. One of the university guys even brought a VR headset so people could take a bee's eye view of the pasture. It was over the top. Intentionally. And it worked. People came. They petted the goats, toured the barn, sampled honey, and signed a poster titled, "I Survived the Biohazard Barn," with glitter pens and stickers. Karen watched from her porch like a gargoyle made of spite and lemon zest. She paced. She filmed. She yelled at a teenager for parking too close to her mailbox. Then, halfway through the event, she finally snapped. She marched across the road in a flowy, floral kaftan, holding a binder and a megaphone. Yes, a megaphone. "Attention," she screeched. "You are all being exposed to unregulated insect activity." The crowd froze. One kid screamed, not because of the bees, but because Karen looked like a sorceress from a home goods clearance bin. "These animals are not registered. The honey is untested. This is a nightmare." Emily, who had flown in just to witness this chaos firsthand, stepped forward like she was auditioning for a legal drama. "Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Tran. I'm a certified legal consultant in agricultural zoning and environmental compliance. Just so we're all clear, this barn is 100% compliant with county and state regulations. The bees are licensed through the Cooperative Apiary Program, and the animals are properly registered under personal livestock exemptions." Karen tried to shout over her. "This is a lie. She's not a lawyer. She's a child." Emily held up her ID. "Graduate student in environmental law, full documentation available on request." Then she turned to the crowd and added, "Also, I brought gluten-free brownies." That got a round of applause. Karen, red-faced and sputtering, stormed back home. But she wasn't done. The next morning, I discovered she had installed a motion-activated speaker system along the fence line. Every time someone got within 10 feet of her property, a voice would boom, "Private property! You are being recorded! Stand back!" It was her voice, of course. Shaky, slightly nasal, and way too loud. The speaker startled a delivery guy so badly he dropped a package in the ditch. It also scared a goat into jumping the fence. The goat, named Pancake, landed squarely in Karen's hydrangea bed. Naturally, she called the police. When the officer arrived, I was already walking Pancake home with a leash and a bag of treat. Karen was in her yard, shrieking like someone had set her geraniums on fire. "This is harassment. He's training them to trespass." The officer turned to me and deadpanned, "Did you train your goat to break into her garden?" I smiled. "Nope. Pancake's just a free thinker." After reviewing the speaker setup, the officer told Karen it was a noise violation. She got another citation. I offered to pay the fine in honey. He declined, but laughed. Karen went quiet again. But the silence felt different this time. Heavier. More dangerous. I started double-checking my lock. I installed a second security camera over the barn door. Even the goats got jumpier. Something was coming. And I was right. It happened on a Wednesday night. Just after 11 p.m. I was in bed when the barn alarm pinged my phone. Motion detected. Infrared image. A figure in dark clothes. I jumped up, grabbed my flashlight, and bolted outside barefoot. As I rounded the driveway, I saw the barn door wide open. Inside stood Karen, wearing a black hoodie, gloves, and holding a can of something that looked suspiciously like bug spray. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. She screamed and dropped the can. "This is a community intervention." I pulled out my phone. "You're trespassing. Again. And now it's attempted property damage. You're done. You poison the neighborhood with bees," she shouted. "I'm just taking care of the infestation." Marcus's hives were still intact, thankfully. But the smell of aerosol in the air made it clear she'd already sprayed at least one of them. I called the sheriff. She tried to run. She didn't get far. Marcus had installed a low-voltage electric fence to keep the goats from chewing the solar inverter. Karen hit it mid-sprint and yelped like a cartoon. She collapsed in a heap of floral chaos, twitching and howling that I was a war criminal. The deputy arrived 10 minutes later. By that point, Karen was curled on the ground screaming about bee armies and anarchist livestock. The deputy just sighed. "I've been waiting for this day." They took her in. Not jail, just holding. But it was enough. Trespassing. Vandalism. Animal endangerment. Possibly attempted destruction of agricultural asset. Emily filed for a no-contact order the next morning. We included photos, witness statements, and a delightful screenshot of Karen mid-spray, mouth open like she was about to deliver a villain monologue. The neighborhood response was immediate. One of the HOA board members resigned, claiming they never actually supported Karen and had only attended meetings for the free wine. Someone else made t-shirts that said "Barn Life, no Karens allowed." The 4-H kids drew thank you cards with little bees saying, "You saved us." Karen's yard grew wild. Her porch empty. The Turtle Rock disappeared. No more HOA letters. No fake signs. No passive-aggressive megaphones. Just silence. But I wasn't celebrating yet. Because I knew Karen. She had one move left. And it was going to sting. Karen always had a way of turning silence into suspense. The kind of silence that doesn't mean surrender, but plotting. After her late-night barn raid and brief stint in county holding, she vanished from public view like a sitcom villain after the mid-season finale. Her shutters were closed. Her car didn't move. Even her once immaculate lawn began sprouting weeds. It would have almost looked like remorse if I didn't know her better. But I did. Karen wasn't the type to regret. She was the type to re-strategize. 2 weeks passed. Peace settled in like fog over a pasture, thin, quiet, suspicious. Marcus and I restored the damaged hive, though the bees were unusually agitated for days. One of the goats stopped sleeping near the barn altogether. Even Pancake, our fence-hopping philosopher, seemed twitchy. I kept the cameras rolling. Every night I checked the footage. Every morning I expected the storm to return. And then it did. It began with a letter. Not an anonymous HOA rant this time. This one came in a crisp, ivory envelope embossed with the logo of a law firm named Trentwell & Company. Inside was a formal notice that I was being sued. By Karen. For emotional distress, property devaluation, loss of community reputation, and the piece de resistance. Reckless apiary endangerment. That's right. She was suing me for the emotional trauma caused by bees that she tried to gas. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the envelope into the goat trough. The lawsuit was real, though. Real enough to require a response. Emily returned, furious in that perfectly contained way only attorneys in training can manage. "She's throwing spaghetti at the wall," she said, flipping through the complaint. "There's no legal standing. She's trying to make you spend money. She wants you rattled." "Well," I said, "joke's on her. I love wasting her time, more than I love woodworking." We filed a counter-motion immediately. Our stack included her trespassing footage, the destroyed hive photos, the fake real estate sign incident, the public disturbance complaints, the megaphone speaker recordings, and witness affidavits from everyone from the goat volunteers to the VRB exhibit kid. Emily even added the viral video clip of Karen getting zapped by the low-voltage fence, which had made it to TikTok with the caption, "Karen vs. Goat Security. Who wins?" The court date was set. Karen, of course, showed up wearing all white like she was being martyred. She walked in with a legal rep from Trentwell & Company, a nervous-looking associate who had clearly drawn the short straw. I showed up with Emily, 3 binders, a fresh jar of honey labeled Exhibit B, and a t-shirt under my blazer that read, "Support your local apiarist." The judge was a no-nonsense woman with the expression of someone who had absolutely no time for petty drama. Karen launched into a dramatic monologue about psychological trauma, alleging she now flinched every time she saw a sunflower and had developed a buzz-related phobia. Her attorney tried to spin the trespassing as community oversight and even implied that my bees had behaviorally targeted Karen's property. The moment those words left his mouth, the courtroom laughed. Even the stenographer chuckled. Then it was our turn. Emily stood and calmly laid out the timeline, every incident, every escalation, every piece of evidence. She didn't even raise her voice. She let Karen's absurdity carry its own weight. When she played the video of Karen's late-night break-in, you could hear a pin drop. When she displayed the fake for sale sign photos, the judge raised an eyebrow. But when Emily held up the email blast and read aloud the phrase, "Biological Livestock Terror Zone," the case all but collapsed under its own ridiculous weight. Karen stood up and shouted, "This is a smear campaign." The judge tapped her gavel and said, "Ma'am, this is your email. You sent it." The court ruled in our favor, of course. Karen's suit was dismissed with prejudice. Our countersuit for property damage and harassment was allowed to proceed. She was fined for the destroyed hive and ordered to stay 100 feet away from my barn. She stormed out of the courtroom red-faced and muttering about legal tyranny. But it didn't stop there. Karen's outbursts and public antics had turned her into a local legend, for all the wrong reasons. Videos of her beekeeper purge went viral. The HOA quietly removed her from every committee. Then they restructured the bylaws to prevent any one resident from creating new committees without majority approval. Her former allies vanished. Her pristine porch, once the epicenter of passive-aggressive community leadership, was now vacant. The wreath fell off. The fairy lights sagged. Her lawn became a jungle. One day, a moving truck pulled into her driveway. I stood at the edge of my pasture and watched her load box after box in silence. No clipboard. No megaphone. No final rant. Just the hum of defeat, and probably a few bees buzzing nearby, for poetic effect. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't even glance in my direction. She just got in her SUV, slammed the door, and peeled out like the last gasp of a collapsing empire. We didn't celebrate. Not in the big, fireworks and champagne sense. No need. Her absence was celebration enough. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood changed. Calmer. Brighter. People smiled more. Kids walked past the barn without their parents yanking them away. One elderly neighbor baked me a pie with a note that said, "Thank you for protecting the bees and our sanity." Marcus expanded his beekeeping program and got requests from other farms. Emily wrote a paper about the whole ordeal for one of her environmental law courses. It was titled The Apiarist Defense, When Entitlement Meets Ecology. She got an A. As for me, I finally got to enjoy my barn again. The goats returned to their favorite sleeping spots. The hives flourished. The pasture bloomed with wildflowers, buzzing with life. I installed a sign at the front gate, small, wooden, hand-carved. It said, "No trespassing. No Karens. Bees welcome." But just when I thought the saga was over, something strange happened. One afternoon, I was working on a cedar planter in the barn when I heard a vehicle pull up. It wasn't a neighbor. It wasn't Marcus. It was a city truck. Out stepped a woman in a reflective vest, holding a clipboard. Not Karen style, but the real kind, the kind that came with authority. "Afternoon," she said. "I'm with the city's Department of Sustainability. We've been hearing a lot about this place lately." I braced myself. "In a good way or a Karen way?" She smiled. "The good way." Words gotten around. The beekeeping initiative, the environmental education days, the pollinator-friendly pasture. It's impressive. She handed me a brochure. "We're launching a pilot program for local agricultural education site. Small grants, recognition plaques, possible school partnership. We were wondering if you'd like to be our first." I looked at the brochure, then at the barn, then at the bees, gently hovering around a clump of lavender. I smiled. "Sure," I said. "But you'll want to steer clear of the fence. Pancakes a hugger." She laughed. "Noted." And just like that, the barn that Karen once tried to shut down became the crown jewel of our little valley. From petty vendetta to pollinator paradise, the land had spoken, and this time, it buzzed back. So if you're ever driving down a winding country road and you see a sign that says barn life, EST in spite of Karen, stop in. Grab a jar of honey. Pet a goat. And know this: no matter how loud a Karen screeches, bees always win in the end.